even if you fake it till you make it and pretend like you're here for the long run, but you approach it with a short-term mindset, the actions you take will just reflect that, and like you're not going to see the results that you're thinking of. Whereas when you fundamentally tell yourself and believe, like when you show up, that if you just show up today and lay one brick by brick and consistently be good versus occasionally just be fantastic, that's a much better way to grow any kind of successful like brand, business, community, and fitness stuff.
Welcome to For the Long Run, the podcast exploring the why behind what keeps runners running long, strong, and motivated. I'm your host, Jonathan Levitt. Through personal and professional connections in the running world, I have the privilege of getting to know some amazing athletes. I've always been fascinated by the psychological aspects of running and what helps people to achieve success, however they define it, and this podcast is aimed at exploring this and much more. I hope you enjoy. Tracksmith is an independent running brand inspired by a deep love of the sport. When gifting for the runners in your life or for yourself this season, versatility and durability are paramount. For several months, I've been living in my Horizon long sleeve from Tracksmith. This quick-drying poly-cotton blend shirt is a whisper-light part of my wardrobe that I like to wear on its own or layer over base layer in colder temperatures. During the month of December, visit tracksmith.com/FTLR and use code FTLR at checkout for free shipping and to support Bigger Than the Trail. Bigger Than the Trail is a nonprofit organization that is using trail running as a platform to advocate for mental health. This episode is brought to you by Freedom Solar Power, the company I use to go solar on my house. Go solar this year and you'll get to take advantage of the 30%, yep, that's new, federal tax credit next year. It's time to break free from rising electricity costs. When I first started looking into solar, I thought it would be a clunky and expensive process. Going solar isn't as hard as you think it is, and Freedom Solar is a turnkey solution focused on educating the consumer and making sure they have all the information they need to make sure going solar is right for them, both financially and as a way to help the planet. Freedom Solar operates in Texas, Colorado, Virginia, Florida, and now North Carolina too. There are plenty of other great options nationwide. I have a super important question for you. Are you giving your body the nutrients it needs to help bolster and protect your immune system? How do you know? Friends, I'm here to help you eliminate the guesswork with two products that have had a huge impact on keeping me healthy and strong during my training and races that I strongly encourage you to try. Previnex Probiotic and Previnex Immune Health Plus are powerhouse products that can help you perform at your best and keep you healthy, especially as we move into a season where bugs that can take you down are everywhere. Use code FTLR for 15% off your purchase at Previnex.com. That's Previnex.com. Stay tuned after this episode to hear a listener's question answered. All right. Welcome back. I've got Corey Nicholson joining me on the podcast today. Corey, thanks so much for taking some time to chat.
Totally, dude. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So the first question of this podcast is always a challenging one. And the question is, who is Corey?
All right. I like it. Corey, I am someone who full-time runs businesses. Like that's my day-to-day career job. That's what I'm involved with. I run an e-commerce brand and also an agency. But when I'm not doing that, I am heavily involved with the life of fitness. And so this all started off initially with weightlifting and bodybuilding when I was younger, like when I was 18, 19. I'm now 21, based in Toronto. But it led from that strength training to now a mixture of both running and the strength, which like kind of brands me as a hybrid athlete, I would say.
Very cool. And I've had a lot of conversations with athletes on this podcast who have gone through the experience of training and focusing on metrics and understanding the process. And I was just having a conversation this morning on the run about this. And the conclusion we came to is for a lot of people, you need the experience of trying something, having it not work, and then really just learning from those experiences that like often doesn't come until your 30s or 40s or 50s, or you just never get it. So super curious to dive into this with you as a 21-year-old who seems to have learned a few things already over the years. And excited to learn from you and have the audience learn from you as well.
Yeah, let's do it.
So you mentioned that you got into running through cross country. So talk to me about that. Why was it of interest to you?
Yeah, for sure. I like to kind of brand myself as two different versions of myself. Like there's the old me and the new me. So like there's Corey 1, Corey 2. Corey 1 was existent in high school, and that was when I first got into running. And I did not view running like the same way I did back then at all as I do now. Like a simple jog from my high school to like the path we used to run in was considered long to me. And there's even this one race that we went out to where there was like a decent climb in the run, and I bailed. And I was just in a different mindset there. And that was like when I first got into running, that's how I viewed it. I viewed it as a way to skip school and just to kind of run, hang with friends, and that's it. That was the old Corey. And then Corey number 2 comes in long after that, where, I entered the world of ultra marathons, which we get into, and like the stuff I'm training for now. But that's how it all unfolded. It was high school cross country. And that's when I realized like the only thing I took away from that was the mental clarity you get from running. So even though I wasn't as engaged with performance and trying hard, I still noticed like the mental benefits it has, like when you finish and like release all those endorphins. So that's one thing I learned. But then as I transitioned out of high school into university, or like into like this whole like post high school life, that's when I started going for runs more casually and wasn't really trained towards anything. But then I realized that I have this skill set, and that's when I kind of dabbled more into putting it into work, into use.
And then where did ultras come into play?
Right. So for that, I look up to 2 people a lot. Like I try not to consume as much content as I used to. I'm more focused on like producing now, kind of like this, which is awesome. But when I do watch, it's a lot of Nick Bare and David Goggins. And so those 2 models alone, which I'm sure you're aware of them. Do you know Nick Bare?
We did a podcast together last summer.
Oh, no way. Yeah. Nick's a great guy. I watched a lot of him and a fair bit of David Goggins as well. And them 2 alone made me realize that you don't just have to be a bodybuilder and a powerlifter, and you don't just have to be a runner. You can combine it and like brand this whole new hybrid athlete thing. And so that's what made me realize, okay, like I've spent the last 2-3 years very deep inside of bodybuilding and powerlifting. I've been able to hit some, notable lifts in the gym. I want to start running now and do it more seriously. And so I thought 50K feels short, 100K feels long. Let's try something else. And so I landed at 60K, and I found this race in Calgary called the Iron Legs that I ran this August 2022. And that was definitely very life-changing event.
What about it?
I would say first the training. I didn't know. I think when it comes to ultra training, you're not just training for a 5K like I am now. It's more of this is a commitment. Like your weekends are pretty much gone to running, depending on how like you structure your day. But when you're running companies and you have this, like every single weekend consisted of like 3 to 4 hours of running per day. And then during the week as well, you're squeezing in runs that are like 60 to even like 90 minutes and stuff like that. So that was the first part, was the training. But I got through all of that. I enjoyed it. I found joy in it just through trying to go for runs with friends. I met a group through Strava, playing music, listening to podcasts while going for some of these runs, because since you're going slower, that was helpful. But in the actual race day, I'm from Toronto, where there isn't too much hills or altitude here. Like we're just basically like just above sea level. But I was over in Calgary, where at one point, like throughout the whole race, I climbed 9,500 feet, which isn't as much as Leadville. I think Leadville is around 12 or 13. But I was close to 10,000 feet, and that was kind of unexpected when I entered the race. So the first 10K went smooth. And then after that is when I was like, oh crap, this is going to be very hard for me. There's like a lot of learnings I took from that first ultra that I am excited to apply to my next one.
What are some of those takeaways?
So the first one was that I was not getting enough food down. This is probably a common one you hear about, but it's incredibly important to get your calories down. And during my race in particular, I was only getting mainly just gels down for almost the whole run. Like my stomach was just not cooperating in terms of, hunger. And I went into it assuming that I was going to be starving and hungry. And during training, I would get used to eating. But on the actual race day, I'm not sure if it's because like the time the race started at 6 a.m. or whatnot, but I was struggling to get food down. So that was number 1, which I feel like trickles into number 2 and 3, which was kind of the occasional cramping I was getting like, as side stitches, and then also the extreme like cramps and tightness I was getting in my quads and hamstrings. Like at one point in the race, it got to the point where every like 5 minutes I was stopping, bending over, and just really stretching the hamstrings and quads because I could no longer run without it just tightening up and like tensing up.
Yeah, I know that feeling, and it's not fun at all. I love how you talked about the shift and the dedication in the process and finding the joy in the process of training for the ultra. To me, that's the most fun part in the race, is like a celebration of being able to show up on race day, put on a bib, and go a far distance. But I really love just the day to day of doing the work and brick by brick building that fitness. I'm wondering if you've noticed an overlap with that related to entrepreneurship, where like you can't just show up on day one and run a successful business, and it's just like you got to earn your keep and put in the work and have that happen. At what point did you start to notice the overlap between entrepreneurship and running?
For me, I think it was really early on. I think it actually started with lifting weights and entrepreneurship. So I don't know the actual stats, but everyone talks about it. You see it everywhere now. Like there is just some sort of positive correlation between doing endurance or strength training with running a company or being some kind of like entrepreneur. When it came to running, I think it was when I was like just starting out with my longer runs for the training. That's when I really was able to unplug from everything else. Because when you go for a 2-hour run, it's not like you step out the door and instantly you're just free of all your thoughts. It takes a good 20, 25 minutes to first distance yourself from whatever you're doing beforehand, like the current stressors you have in mind. Then once you're around 30 minutes in, at least for me, that's when things start to actually come to me. And then you hit this peak state from like minutes 30 to maybe if it's a 2-hour run from minutes like 30 to 90, it's pretty solid. And then for those bottom 30, you start kind of, for me, like coming back to what you're gonna do next, et cetera, et cetera. But when you're in that peak state, you see things from such a different perspective that you wouldn't otherwise have thought of. And then you're almost excited to get back home and go do those things or think of whatever it was. And it doesn't have to be business related. It can be things you might like, improvements in your relationship or with your family or what you have going on, like any kind of issue. But for business specifically, I got definitely some genuine ideas on how to like improve my current companies, like while all these runs.
It's funny. I will often, like, if I have an important meeting, I'll go for a run and be done 30 minutes prior to it. And that's like how I get my head right for that meeting. And I'll often have, like you said, I'll have ideas on the run that I'll like pull out my phone and take notes because otherwise I'll forget. But yeah, some of the best thinking happens when those endorphins are flowing.
Yeah. Didn't you run before this?
Did I run before this? I did, yes. But right now it's the afternoon. So I ran a few hours ago. I ran this morning with a friend, and we had an interesting conversation around. So I got an email to the podcast website earlier this week, and the email was basically like, "Hey, you talked to a lot of pro athletes. It seems like your conclusion is that following the process versus chasing a specific outcome is natural for the pro athletes, and that striving for this approach leads to success. Do you think that this is because they are pro athletes and this is one of the things that makes them successful? Or do you think that it's possible for amateurs to like find this as well?" And so it's really cool. Like this week, I ran with 3 pro athletes, and I asked all of them this question, and they all had similar but different answers, in that it's very much both. Like you can't have an entirely process focused approach with no benchmarks or check-ins using data along the way, and you can't be obsessed with metrics and expect to be able to zoom out and like achieve big goals and long-term growth. And again, so much overlap with entrepreneurship or business or just like doing anything successful in general, whether it's running or powerlifting or training for Ironman Kona or like whatever it might be.
Anything that requires initiative from like that one person.
Yes. Anything that requires initiative and that can't be done or achieved in like a day. And so this morning I ran with my friend Kat Bradley. Kat's won Western States before, so she comes to this question with quite a lot of I don't want to say merit, but like there's some gravity to her answer, in that following some plan led to conventional success, or what society deems as successful? And her answer was the metrics are the benchmarks and the carrots that help keep us focused and like on the right track on a day-to-day basis. But when you zoom out, it's the sum of all those carrots and it's the sum of the process that leads you to the outcome. So I'm curious your thoughts on that, not as a professional athlete, but as someone who has been successful or is successful on the entrepreneurship side of things. Have you taken an intentional, or has there been any intentionality to how you've approached growing businesses in a similar way that you would grow fitness?
I think that, yeah, there's kind of a couple ways to answer this question, but for the most part, like similar to what you were banging on, it's not going to happen overnight. And it's crazy how the way you approach things mentally can determine the outcome of the event much before you actually start working. So even if you mentally believe that things can happen faster than like you want them to, but you're not actually acting that way, how can I say this? I'm thinking along the lines of like, even if you fake it till you make it and pretend like you're here for the long run, but you approach it with a short-term mindset, the actions you take will just reflect that. And like, you're not going to see the results that you're thinking of. Whereas when you fundamentally tell yourself and believe, like when you show up, that if you just show up today and lay one brick by brick and consistently be good versus occasionally just be fantastic, that's a much better way to growing any kind of successful like brand, business, community, and fitness stuff. So I do agree with what you're saying, but I find that just with social media and with people, promoting stuff and saying certain things, it's very easy to like double tap and say, "Oh, I agree," and try thinking like that and writing it down on whiteboards and all this stuff. But if truly like in your brain, like when you're alone, if you don't believe that it takes a long time and you're looking for shortcuts, then you're probably not going to make it. So it has to be like really believed.
I totally agree. I do think that there is some aspect of fake it till you make it, right? Like this summer, I didn't have a great season of running, and I had to just, I wouldn't say force it, but just again, it's like trust the process and trust that by putting in the work and being consistent, eventually it'll get better, and eventually it'll feel like you want it to feel again.
Yeah, because not every day can be like sunshine and rainbows. And so instead of, and again, like that's another quote and saying that most people hear about, they nod their heads at, they understand it. Like this is a great quote. But when you're actually in it and you see it happen, those days where like, yeah, you have a bad running season, or I had a decently bad workout yesterday, it's those days where it's like, okay, great. Like this day is happening. That means like brightness is actually coming. Like most people try to avoid the day, and if they're sore, they miss their workout, or if they don't go, then etc. But by embracing that and actually going through it, you're putting yourself closer to success. Like it's actually a good thing seeing those bad days come in.
Yeah, my like fallback statement is if you're succeeding 100% of the time, you're leaving a lot on the table.
Yeah, exactly. I agree.
Talking about your business experience, and how did you begin to achieve growth and success on that side of the coin?
Yeah, for sure. So before I launched my current business, which is like a women's shapewear D2C brand on Shopify, I had run maybe anywhere between like 14 to 16 different Shopify brands all before I turned 20 or 21. Like I was super young and I spent all of my time obsessed with just this one topic. And so I was super keen. I heard like one person say when I was like 16 or 17 to go deep on one thing and like master it before expanding. So I stuck to that and I chose e-commerce to be, that's what I bet on. And so for a few years, I would make some money some month and then next month lose. And so I kind of had this game of just evenness for 2 years where nothing substantial was happening, good or bad. And then I have this YouTube channel called Ecom Street that I was running with my current business partner, where we talk all about e-commerce. And he suggested, hey, why don't we, we're doing this channel, why don't we launch a brand together and see how that works since we're doing all this stuff together? So fair, we did it. We launched, this was pre-COVID and pre-TikTok, so it's pre-2020. Like it was like mid-2020, sorry. And that's when we saw our first like heap of success with e-commerce and realized that, okay, we have laid the bricks, we've planted these seeds years ago, and we're finally starting to see, partially due to timing, but also due to patience, like something come from this. And from there, we had motivation, and we realized that even if things were to get bad with this company, it would never be that bad as before since we've made progress. And so that's what initially sparked it. And part of that is due to timing, though, I will say.
But it's like right place, right time with the right experience. Like you've put yourself in a position to take advantage of the timing.
Yes, exactly. So it was like a double, there was two sides to that, which was exactly what you just said. Like if we had this much experience and launched it now, it would still be possible, but far less, in my opinion. So timing does play a big role.
I love what you said about the like brick by brick, or however you, whatever metaphor you use to describe it, where like you could have been talking about building a business, or you could have been talking about training for endurance. And again, like hammering on the only secret is consistency. Consistency is what it takes to grow and to be successful. A topic that I like to ask pro athletes about who have achieved conventional levels of athletic success is how they define success. So for you, I'm curious how you define success.
For sure. The baseline, the end all be all is happiness and positivity. If I'm waking up and I'm like, if I'm healthy, my family's healthy, and my fitness is in check, then anything else that happens usually for that day is gravy. So it's more so the other days where health becomes the topic or someone in the family is ill. That's where the first part of happiness comes away from. But in terms of success in general, I would say as long as every day or every even month I'm working towards my goals and trying my best to do that, then I'm satisfied. So there have definitely been months and weeks and times with both running and business where I've been giving it my all and it feels like things are just going backwards. But if I know that I'm giving it my all, and again, I fundamentally believe that, then I know that if I just give it enough time, things will come through. And it's more so just about, putting a lot of highlight on the positives and what I have going for me and not the negatives, even though they look so much bigger. They're actually not. But our human minds are very trained. They're very used to looking at the negatives and putting a huge magnifying glass on those. And then the positives are always brushed off. And so I figured that out a little bit earlier on. And so that's how I define success. Just happiness, enjoying what I'm doing, and making my best efforts to get close to where I'm going, even if that doesn't mean I see results for a while, as long as I just know that I'm laying the bricks, like you said.
How do you refocus, or how do you sharpen that focus on happiness and joy when you're in it and it might not be going all that well?
Well, the first way is through running. So if I'm sitting at my desk, if something's going wrong at the desk, then I go for a run. If I'm on a run and something's going bad with training, then it becomes more of a reflection where I'm still moving, or where I go for a walk, or I'm recovering. And sometimes one strange thing, not strange, but one thing I will do is record myself on my phone and pretend that I am making a movie that will never be launched, but I pretend that I'm making it and kind of talk to myself about what I truly do have going for me, because sometimes just taking a step back and zooming out is all that's needed. So that's usually what I do. I just zoom out and focus on everything I do have going for me, which most people have a lot of things going for them. They just don't realize it. Like there's a lot of great things that a person could say about themselves, but they don't, because of, again, back to social media. I feel like that drains a lot of the positivity that we're used to having. So I try to stay unplugged from that and just focus on what I do have, and just remind myself daily, hourly, weekly, whatever it may be, that whatever you're going through right now is not going to kill you.
Is gratitude something that has been a practice for you for a while?
To an extent, I think like, especially after this race that I ran in August is when I really started putting more of a focus on it with mental health. I think sometime around there was when I really, before that, it was kind of every day was just a new day and I was tackling things, but things have picked up now to an extent where I need to stay mentally focused and like still. And so that's when gratitude came in for me.
If you've been enjoying this podcast and can spare 90 seconds of your time today, can you do me a favor? Can you pop over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review? It helps other people find and enjoy the podcast too. Thanks so much. Thanks again to Tracksmith for supporting For the Long Run and their continued support of not just this podcast, but the running community in general. Tracksmith is an independent running brand inspired by a deep love of the sport. They've been supporting this podcast since the fall of 2021, and I am so grateful for their help in making this pod possible. They've been able to continue to sponsor the show because listeners like you have been using my code, which is FTLR, and gets you free shipping and a 5% donation to Bigger Than the Trail, which is a nonprofit organization using trail running as a platform to advocate for mental health. If you're looking for a non-monetary way to support the pod, consider leaving a review. It helps more people find it. Thanks again to Freedom Solar for supporting this episode of the podcast, as well as our desire for a greener energy source. The buying process was fascinating and so eye-opening, most notably how simple and cost-effective it can be. I'm excited to pay my learnings forward. If you're curious, message me on Instagram or Twitter, and I'd be happy to help you get in contact with some great resources or even just answer some questions. Freedom Solar is a full-service solar company installing solar panels and backup power systems since 2007. They operate in Texas, Colorado, Virginia, Florida, and now North Carolina too. My parents have the same panels from a different company in Massachusetts. More than a few friends and podcast listeners have already gone solar, and they're all so excited and happy with the process with Freedom Solar so far. I got to talk about this last season of training for a second. So while training for a CIM, I've hit the highest weekly mileage I've ever hit and highest monthly mileage I've ever hit. What's really cool about that is I feel awesome. I feel like I can just keep running and running and running, and I also have the energy for everything else in life. I haven't gotten sick, even despite those around me getting sick, not even the sniffles for me. And I obviously can't pin this on a single thing, but I've been really diligent about taking Previnex's Immune Health Plus and probiotic incredibly diligently. I've been taking that every single day since March, and it's helping. So I encourage you to check it out and use code FTLR at checkout for 15% off at Previnex.com. Why do you think you're able to speak with the knowledge? And I'm curious if you've thought about this question before. How and why do you think you're able to speak with the knowledge that someone 10, 15, 20 years your elder might not be able to speak with, right? Like I've had a couple of conversations with younger athletes who are able to have these conversations that it often takes 30, 40 years of life to like get to a lived experience that allows you to have the self-awareness to even like say the things you're saying. Have you thought about the fact that like you are advanced in your, maybe it's self-awareness or ability to like reconcile these larger topics and use them to help yourself grow?
First of all, thank you. That's definitely an amazing compliment. I'm really thankful for that. Second, I think you nailed it on the head there again with self-awareness, and also just leveraging platforms like the one you have right here when it comes to information and really just listening and applying that. And so like I said, we all hear the same quotes. We all read the same books. They're all out there. It's about deeply actually reading those and listening to those, fundamentally believing it and adding it to your values book, and then just following it. And so that doesn't happen overnight. But over enough time, if you listen to enough Nick Baer, David Goggins, this podcast, etc., and truly actually apply it instead of just listening to it in a comfortable environment and never actually getting out of that environment, that's where it comes from. So there's nothing here that I'm doing that's freakishly new. I don't have any like genes that make me special. It's just about listening to it and applying it. And the only way to do that is have a bias for action and like putting yourself in that race day or in that, speaking competition when you're scared of speaking publicly, something like that. That's what will put you ahead more than just, another book.
I like that bias for action, how you said it there. So I'm pretty familiar with Nick Baer. I've chatted with him a bunch. I love his approach to life. I had an hour-long conversation with him on the podcast where it was like pretty good. And I asked him one question that just like uncovered his why behind creating a business, being prolific on social media, and like being so out there and with an intent of inspiring. And it's fascinating when you can understand the reasoning behind why someone is motivated to do something, and then everything else makes a ton of sense. So I'm curious for you, what are some of the, specifically from him, like bias towards action, what are some of the actions you've taken from some of the content you've consumed, either from Nick or from David or David Goggins or other books or podcasts you've listened to?
Yeah, there's definitely a couple. Some of it can get very micro, some can get like a little bit more macro and longer term. But for example, one topic that Nick Baer talks about is a saying he says is I think I already said it once, but the goal is to be consistently good versus occasionally great. I heard that one the first time, and I think I'm working more towards being occasionally just like between good and great. So a bit better than good, but not as like fantastic as the top of the world. Because before this, like a year ago, or the old Corey, I was notoriously known for half the time being off the ball, not good, not sharp. And then for the other half, being on the ball and being fantastic. And it's just not sustainable. It's just like it's like a dangerous stock to invest in. No one really wants that. And so I realized that, hey, this workout might be a 9 out of 10, but if I hit 9 out of 10 workouts every day this week, that's going to be better than having one awesome leg day and then 3 crappy workouts afterwards. So that's kind of one that I've applied. And the second one, before I hear from you, David Goggins references to this cookie jar analogy a lot, where he'll talk about how when he's in the middle of it, like when he's in that pain cave, going deep and looking for a way out, but there is no way out, so you have to keep going. He reminds himself of some of the things he's done in the past that he's gotten through, and reminds him that, hey, if I've gotten through this incredibly challenging thing, I can definitely get through this, no problem, because you'll find things that were worse in that situation that aren't present here, and so you'll be good. So for example, for my 60K race, there was 9,500 feet of climb. If I go for 100K next, but there's only 5,000 feet of climb, for example, I know that I'm going to be able to probably get through that at one point when I remind myself that I did almost double that elevation before, just as an example.
Yeah, I love both of those. So one of the hardest things I've ever done was rim to rim to rim, and it took about 13 hours to complete. It was 45 miles with 11,000 feet of gain, all happening in 2 chunks. And the climb out to end that run was the hardest thing I've ever done physically, and definitely the hardest thing I've ever done mentally.
For sure.
And the number of times that I've like thought about those endless switchbacks with the fake summits where you think you're done, but you really still have like another mile to go. The number of times I've thought about that, both in running, on runs, or in life when things are hard, I don't know, like 100.
Mm-hmm.
And it was awful in the moment. And I recorded a video of myself on my phone so that I could like memorialize this moment and draw on it when things felt hard again, because I can pull up my phone and watch myself in the lowest I've ever felt. And in that moment, what I was saying to my phone was, one foot in front of the other. That is the secret.
Yep.
Just keep going. And that's like the secret to anything. And so whether it's like reflecting on when things get hard with other things that have been hard that you've gotten through, and just like raising the bar, I think it's a really smart way to push through hard stuff. And then one of the things I love most about running is like, you do something hard, and then the next time you do something hard, it's not as hard. And you're just like continuing to raise the bar of what is attainable. Nick says, go one more. I love that analogy. Yeah. I love that saying of like, just do it again, just one more. And then as you do just one more, it's only ever one more. So you don't have to think about that. I was talking with Kat this morning. She's like, as part of a 100-miler, mile 15 is the hardest place for me, because I have 85 miles ahead, and I can't think about it that way. I have to think about, just get to the next aid station, just get to the next aid station, just get to the next hour, just eat the next gel. Like these little micro blocks that you can't zoom out and look at the full picture. You have to zoom in. Otherwise, it's like, it's incomprehensible to run 100 miles. You cannot think that you're running 100 miles. You have to think you're running 20 miles, 10 miles. You're like, 15 miles is a long run. So it's like those micro carrots along the way that you know, when you put it together and together and together, you zoom out and you've got something cool.
Yeah. And that like will forever hold to be true. And I didn't learn that until I was almost halfway into my first ultra. So for all of my training, like I had no idea that was even true until then. So I kind of approached race day, confident, bodybuilder background, like youngest kid there. I thought I was just going to crush it. And then like 23 kilometers in, I was like, what is going on here? And then from kilometer maybe 33 to 38, like there was an aid station at 39. And from kilometer 33 to 38, 8, I was convinced my brain was ready and I was ready just to completely drop. And I was convinced that I was going to come out to the aid station and do whatever I had to do just to stop and just stay there. But then right before I came out from that, so from kilometer 38 to 39, where the aid was, I hit a high. I met someone else who was pushing me. I was pushing her. And yeah, I came out saying, no way, I'm stopping now. You kind of keep going. And so the lows, although they feel much longer, they go away eventually, and then you can ride the highs again.
Why do you think you turned that corner there?
Of not dropping?
Yeah.
I think it was just a combination of that person who was just like kind of helping me push along and keep up with her. And I had my Rocky Balboa playlist going, and I reminded myself of the old Corey, like Corey 1 versus Corey 2, and how just like 4 or 5 years earlier, Corey 1 was that person who dropped out of a simple 5K race because he was tired. There's no problem. I just dropped it. And I was like, there's no way I'm about to relive it again. There's no way that I'm about to do that 5 years later, because that means that nothing's changed here. Because the training is great, like good for you, you trained. But if you can't show up on performance day, like race day, and get through it, then none of it really matters in my opinion. So unless like your leg is actually broken, which mine was not. So I kind of just found the hope in that and kept going.
So fast forward 10 years, you're an elder 31. What are you really excited about having accomplished in those 10 years?
On the fitness side, I definitely want to one day tackle an 100K or 100 miler race. I think one of the skills I have with life is that I've allowed myself to view fitness as just fitness and more of a hobby than anything else. I find that when I get too professional with it, which I've tried before, not in the sense of like actually going professional level, but just like being too obsessed with the metrics, like you were saying earlier, like too obsessed with everything, that's when things start to diminish. So I'm happy that I can just view my entire life as like, okay, career is like actually important, and family and relationships, and fitness is like that one escape where I can kind of just go and do whatever. So in 10 years, I'm excited just to be able to do more horsing around and have fun with running in the gym. And then business wise, I'm excited to kind of sell this current company that I'm working on and venture into new things. Like, I'm really thankful to have a business partner who sees eye to eye to me with a lot of things, and we happen to be great friends as well. And so having just 1 or 2 great people in your life is better than having 10 or 15 that are all like suboptimal. And so I'm excited to kind of, venture into more companies, which brings me a lot of joy, and accomplish some kind of level of insane fitness stuff. I think it's harder for me because I have the lifting side of things going as well as the running, and I've seen my strength kind of plateau from that and drop off a bit, but it's so worth it for like the mental clarity you get.
Why do you desire to go longer?
There's always like a little small voice in my brain. Part of it, I think, relates back to the whole theory of maybe imposter syndrome. I don't know how to label it, but when I finished that race after the 60K, I was already getting ready for new one. Like that night we were looking at my laptop for new races, and I realized that like this, of course I was in pain. I couldn't walk for a day, but then I was fine. And I just realized that it could have been a lot worse. Like the pain was still insane and I wanted to quit at points, but I just feel like I'm able to handle more. And so that's kind of why. Like, there's no ego. There's no kind of nothing to really prove to anybody besides myself. It's just like I can handle more with the proper training. So I'm just going to try it.
Do you think it's like exploring like where the boundary is?
It could be exploring where the boundary is, yes. And it's just an excuse to travel and kind of go to cool places and go see that. Like, and you meet great people out there and get to talk more like this. But yeah, I think seeing my boundaries is definitely one, because the 60K was close, but I think there was more room. Will that be an extra 40K? Hopefully, like I think I can make it.
Or an extra 40 miles or 70 miles.
Yeah.
65 miles. Yeah, I find that so interesting, right? Like the running community is focused around a handful of events: the mile, the marathon, the 100-mile. And it's so interesting. We have these arbitrary numbers that people have deemed as like what gets focused on. You're currently training for a 5K. I think the 5K training that I've done was the hardest training I've ever done.
It's pretty hard.
It's when done properly, it's pretty damn hard.
The speed workouts.
But to that point, when I was training for a 5K, I felt the need to qualify that I was training for a fast 5K. I wasn't just like training for a 5K.
Yeah.
And it's crazy.
It's a big pivot. So a lot of like I said earlier, I met that group of people during my ultra training on Strava that were all in my area that were all training, and they all run like they were all very prolific runners that have run like the Berlins, a lot of them have ran like sub 3 marathons and stuff. And so they know what they're talking about. And then they saw me at the track now training for a 5K after doing all this long run 60K training, and they were just like, yeah, like good luck, like you gotta run fast.
Yeah, it's funny when you talk to ultra runners about short distances or even marathons, which they deem as tempo runs.
Yeah.
The first time I went to Western States, I was obsessed with asking people why are you doing this? And so here I was the Friday before the Saturday morning race asking random people, why are you doing this? And one guy goes, because it's not a 5K. It's easier than a 5K. I was like, your qualifiers here are way off. Like it's not easier than a 5K. It's easier than a 5K in like
the intensity,
finding the red line, the intensity. But like the guy was probably stoked to finish in 26 hours versus 26 minutes.
Yeah.
Whereas I spent a season focused on 5Ks, and it's such an interesting experience to like find the line and feel what it feels like when you overshoot that line, and then take that as a piece of data, and then you undershoot, and then you nail it. And when you nail it with something like that, it's like such a cool feeling to know that on that day you could not have given any more.
Yeah.
And there's such a cool feeling to that.
How was it?
It's like so
5K?
liberating to know that you've gotten everything out. How was it?
Yeah, how was it? Where'd you end up landing?
I ran 17:42. That was my fastest. And I ran it. This was 2014, and I've still not beaten that time, which is crazy. I'm like so much fitter and more experienced now. I ran that time in a workout in a 20-minute tempo, and I can't figure out why I can tempo my 5K PR and then run for 2 more minutes, but not beat the 5K PR.
That's quick. So what is that per kilometer? Like like 310 or something?
I don't know the kilometer breakdown. It's a 5:42 mile pace.
Wow. Okay.
So what it felt like was like an out of body experience. So I ran it with a couple of friends who knew that my goal was to break 18 on that day, and they came up to me and they said at the start line, like, don't look at your watch, just follow us. And these are guys that can run like 16 mid 5Ks. So 17 high is slow for them. And it was such an interesting experience to just like ride the edge. I sort of knew where my fitness was, and it was like a exercise in trust, and trusting that like this math equation was right, that like my ability was what it was. And then you finish it and you can't breathe for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And then you're totally fine.
Basically, yeah, the recovery is a lot different. Did you find that there was a certain pattern with these 5Ks you ran? Like, were kilometers 1 and 2 fast and 3 was like the slowest and you pick back up again? Or was there a pattern there?
Yeah, it was like a bell curve where fast, slow, fast. I'm thinking in terms of miles, but you can just extrapolate, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. But it's basically like fast, slow, slow, fast, fast, fast.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of research on the best way to run mid-distance races like that. And that seems to be like, you can't, I'm pretty sure it's negative splitting is not the most efficient way to run those types of races, definitely for a 5K. And I believe also for a mile. It usually follows, or at least world records follow this sort of bell curve where the middle is the slowest and the end is the fastest. And it's such a rush to like have that kick and absolutely empty the tank and go to the well. And like I said, have nothing else left.
Mm-hmm. I agree, especially when like during the training runs, when you're on the last loop and you know that the end of the workout is near. And so you have maybe 500 meters to go and you're giving it your all, you're sprinting, and your body is pretty much like able to give up earlier, but you just push through that wall. Especially when your brain, like your eyes can visually see the finish line or like the mark on the track where you're supposed to stop. Like it wants to give up earlier. Like I've had to train myself to like pretend the finish line is 20 yards behind the actual real one, just so I keep sprinting.
And run through it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so cool how you can use the brain to overcome, right? Like I ran beyond my fitness on that day, and I am still confused as to how I ran that fast like 8 years ago when I I didn't really have the fitness to do that.
Right.
And it's definitely like, I didn't look at my watch. I would have been scared to see those times. And you can like unlock that next level. And so like this podcast is basically an exercise in understanding how to unlock that next level, and how to, again, both when you're in the moment of, okay, this hurts a lot, what am I going to do? But also like framing the season of, I'm going to train for this. How do I orchestrate a successful season of training? And it's so cool to be able to learn from so many unique and different life experiences who have gone through something and improved, and now they're sharing their takeaways.
Yeah, it's incredible. Like, if you believe you can do something, you're almost halfway there. And so, but when your mindset's gone, it's screwed. So, especially on those race days, but even before important training dates, like a speed workout, or like when you're close to a race and you have like that one or two like crucial workouts left, if you wake up and you approach that run, like you can almost tell how it's going to go sometimes beforehand. And so if you enter the workout or enter that race kind of just half, like wakey, then you kind of know you're just not going to do as well. Whereas if your brain is ready to go, your body will follow suit. Like if your brain is set to the highest gear, your body is pretty much forced to keep up. Whereas not vice versa. If your body is ready to go, but your brain is not, it will not follow suit, and you will run slower just because of that.
For
and
sure.
It can come down to weather or what you're wearing or what you heard before that. Like it's very strange how some of it is placebo, some of it may be real. Like for each person, it's different. But sometimes even like the color of shirt you're wearing on race day can impact how fast you run, because you just feel like it's kind of interesting how like the mind works there.
Yeah, look good, feel good.
Yeah, that definitely.
It's real.
I've had that. See that. Yeah.
Getting to a place where you're happy and joyful and checking the boxes of endurance, entrepreneurship, family, etc. What do you know today that you wish you knew, Corey 1.0?
It's a great question. I think for life in general, not e-commerce, which is what I'm always talking about, I feel like the first thing is what I just said about mindset. Like the first objective every day and every hour should be to check in mentally and make sure you're feeling confident, grateful, and thankful, or else everything else that you're about to go and do is just going to be performed at like a suboptimal level. Of course, there will still be times where you have to go and do it regardless, and it might not be as good. But reminding yourself that number one, of your accomplishments and what you've done and what you have right now, not what you don't have. And then number two, reminding yourself that if you're just, occasionally, being occasionally excellent is not very good. Like you want to be consistently just like great. Those are like the main two things that I wish I knew. Because like I said before, I was notoriously known for rushing, being behind, not managing my time properly, getting into small fights that don't matter. And so being able to just like to click out of all that small stuff, like the news and whatever, like most people get triggered by, and just focusing on what you need to get done and being thankful for what you do have, because we all do have something if we really think about it. Like the main two, I'd say. Before I was blind to it, and I was always chasing like the next big thing.
That makes sense. Corey, I appreciate you sharing your insights and your journey to the 60K and the 5K and everything in between. For those who might not be following you, where can we find you on your corner of the internet?
I think the best spot to find me is Twitter. My handle, like we'll have it below, but it's Corey N CEO. And yeah, thank you, Jonathan, for having me. This has been great.
Of course. And if you are interested in e-commerce, specifically Shopify, I highly recommend following Corey. He's got a lot of great stuff on Twitter. Corey, thanks so much. And hopefully we'll see you out there.
Yeah, anytime.
Our next listener submitted question is an incredibly popular one. How do I train for a marathon? Well, the answer to this one is how you do anything. One step at a time, one day at a time, one run at a time. You can't look at the race day, having never run, say more than 10 miles, and think, okay, tomorrow I'm going to run a marathon. or the next month I'm going to run a marathon. It's building this fitness on a day by day, week by week, month by month basis. And so my recommendation is before you think about running a marathon, be able to consistently do 10-mile long runs. If you can do 10-mile long runs, that can probably support the base training required to train for a marathon. So I think 16 weeks for your first marathon is pretty much the minimum if you're coming into it with anywhere between 10 and 20 miles a week, probably at a bare minimum. Mind you, you can just go out and run a marathon, but if you want it to feel as good as it can, that's where the training comes in. As I record this, I am 3 days away from running my next marathon, which is the California International Marathon. And in the buildup, I had 2 months in a row of the highest mileage month I'd ever had. So I don't know how race day will go, but I know by putting in a lot of mileage and putting in a lot of consistency, I've given myself every opportunity to have a great race day as possible. So when it comes to training for a marathon, you want to focus on what is the most amount of work that you can sustain before it becomes too much. So before it becomes too much from a physical stress standpoint, as well as a life stress standpoint. So emotional stress should be considered as well. Is it a busy season at work? That should be factored in. Is your partner or family supportive of this? That should be factored in. And do you just enjoy sleeping in on Saturdays? That should be factored in as well. It really takes consistency. It takes knowing the why, as we talked about a couple weeks ago. And it takes a great podcast. So we hope we can share some miles with you as you train for this marathon if this is a question that you're curious about. That's it for today's episode. Like many long runs, it's sad when it has to end. I hope you join in next time on For the Long Run. And in the meantime, happy trails. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean a lot to me if you shared it so that others can find it and enjoy it too. This podcast and the accompanying music has been produced by Brian Walters of Single Track Sound. For the Long Run's logo was created by Vanessa Wolf of Sterling Wolf. Show notes have been written by Ruby Wiles and is managed by Emily Holland. It takes a village.